Even the heavenly beings who surround her are moved to pity and a feeling that she is overstern. And certainly our first reaction is that she is indeed hard on his most natural and human reaction to such a separation. So he's crying over Virgil leaving, and she's basically like, stop being such a crybaby. And all the angels are like, oh, don't be mean to him. But if we look deeper, we begin to understand. She certainly is not rebuking or scolding him for his inevitable grief at the parting. We rightly feel suffering when we must leave behind a way of life or an attitude which has been up to this point an unqualified good, and when outwardly or inwardly we must part from those who have brought us to the new threshold and whom we have greatly loved. What is no longer allowed is the emotional indulgence of this suffering on a personal, self-pitying level. Tears indeed are still to come, tears of quite another kind, which will finally submerge us in Lethe and Juno and bring us to established joy. But to weep long at this point for a personal loss could be a fatal evasion, a betrayal of the joy in the heart of the quest. It is in fact an evasion of a kind we all know, the refusal of the responsibility of joy and freedom on the threshold of a new awareness for which we have long striven. We very often deserve Beatrice's words. We condescend to climb and struggle, but we don't condescend to be happy. Dante is now at the point where he must look back on his whole life and remember with absolute clarity and without any vestige of excuse-making every smallest betrayal of the vision which had been given him in his youth, and he must recognize such betrayal as the black thing that it is. Only in that final experience of contrition, in which the ego is ground to powder, will the split in the psyche be healed. Only when the last lingering vestige of unconscious assent to sin has been purged away, in Dorothy Sayers' words, can the full realization of true guilt be born. Before this point, if a man were to see himself so clearly, he would be submerged in remorse and false guilt, and the final cleansing tears of total contrition would be impossible. At Peter's Gate, Dante had made an act of contrition. He had recognized its nature and had chosen to suffer the purging of his unconscious motives. Here, after the passage of the fire, the final knowledge of contrition comes to him. All shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, by the purification of the motive in the ground of our beseeching. That's T.S. Eliot, quoting the Lady Julian, 4 quartets. Dante's long journey down and up has brought him at last to look again clear-eyed on her whom he truly loved with his whole heart on earth, and she will lead him to the fullness of love in heaven, but not before she has ruthlessly exposed to him his infidelities. She stresses the extraordinary gifts of nature and grace which were his, and which enabled him, when he fell in love in his youth, to catch so clear a glimpse of the end in the beginning. His early poems in the Vita Nuova leave us in no doubt of the new life which his love opened in him, nor does Beatrice. Of the lines. Not the great wheels alone, whose workings tend, as in their aspects all their stars congress, to guide each seed to its appropriate end, but graces also of divine largesse, which have their reins from clouds too high to see, they so transcend our eyesight's littleness, had so endowed this man potentially in his new life that from such gifts as those be a wondrous harvest should have come to be. I believe her reference here is not only to his new inner life, but to his first book, La Vita Nuova, at the close of which he had written, "It was given to me to behold a wonderful vision, wherein I saw things which determined me to say nothing further of this blessed one, Beatrice, until such time as I could discourse more worthily concerning her. And to this end I labor all I can, as she in truth knoweth. Therefore, if it be his pleasure, in whom is the life of all things, that my life continue with me a few years. It is my hope that I shall yet write concerning her what hath not before been written of any woman. The Vita Nuova was certainly written soon after Beatrice's death in 1290. Dante was exiled in 1302, and the first manuscript of the Inferno was circulating in 1314. What had been going on in the years between? He had written two quite different kinds of work, the philosophical Convivio and the politico-philosophical De Monarchia. Thus, Beatrice goes on to accuse Dante of having forsaken the truth his wholehearted devotion had taught him. She said, "And by wild ways he wandered, seeking for false phantoms of the good, which promise make of joy, but never fully pay the score. With inspirations, prayer wrung for his sake. Vainly in dreams and other ways as well, I called him home, so little did he reck. And in the end, to such a depth he fell, that every means to save his soul came short, except to let him see the lost in hell." These words are spoken to the angelic beings who thought her too severe. Now she turns on Dante himself and demands from him a straight answer to her accusations. "In that desire of me which bore thy love along with it to seek the good, past which there's nothing to be eager for, what didst thou find? What pitfalls in the road? What chains, that thou shouldst cast all hope away of pressing onward as a traveler should? And what allurement, what advantage, pray, seemed in those rival favors so to lie, that thou must bow and scrape to such as they?" People have speculated as to what kind of infidelities were hinted at. As with all of us, they must have been legion, and their details do not matter. But when a poet is in question, most of all a poet of Dante's stature, the major betrayal to which Beatrice refers must surely have been a turning away from the poetic vision of love to which he had pledged devotion in the last words of the Vita Nuova. There are certain signs in the Convivio, for instance, that Dante did just this. In her essay, In Telling You a Story, Dorothy Sayers wrote, "The Dante of the Convivio has everything that the other Dante has. The great intellect, the great curiosity, the great poetry, the great piety or religiousness, but without humility and without charity. The sin is not primarily girls or anybody's system of philosophy. It is simply the thing known as hardness of heart." In the Convivio, as she points out, he was apt to lecture people, to tell his readers how he had matured since writing the Vita Nuova, to talk down to them. Then he tries to explain his obvious love poems in terms of philosophy and allegory, so that the immediacy of feeling, of love and pain and laughter, is turned to cold reason. When this happens to a man, he will, of course, at the same time be delivered over to sensuality. These are indeed the twin poles of hardness of heart, cold intellect and sensuality. It landed Dante in the dark wood, undermining and threatening his integrity as poet and man. He emerged after the long journey to write the Commedia in that abiding spirit of humility which brings true self-confidence. His charity shines through all 100 cantos of his poem. He has entirely escaped from lecturing people. On the contrary, he makes the reader his familiar friend, sharing with him his highest, his lowest, and his most ridiculous moments. So it's like when someone only shares like their good times, like on Facebook or something, if they only share their highlights and don't share or show when they have hard times. That was the Convivio for him. Beatrice's indictment is truly the same for all of us in our degree. If we have even once been capable of falling into a love which opens our hearts to that joy which excludes nothing in the universe, however little we understand it at the time, then As soon as we return to partial goals, seeking for false phantoms of the good, we are on the way to the dark wood of hardness of heart, where we may or may not be saved by the memory of that love. The forms of our personal phantoms are infinitely varied. The betrayal is one, and if pursued to the end, is the road to the frozen pit of Judica. Partially recognized in the dark wood, this betrayal cannot be fully known and accepted until we are ready to look again, with as profound humility and as love as did Dante, on the reality we have rejected. Whose form will each of us see standing on the car when we come to this moment? For the human Beatrice on her journey, it might have been Dante, or it might have been another of either sex. For some, there may be no doubt at all. The beloved's image may have been a lifelong companion, but for others, the shining memory may have been dimmed and hidden to be reborn in the images rising from the unconscious in dream or imaginative vision. It is a very common experience. Everyone who has truly fallen in love has had it, and sex in the narrow sense is not the important thing. It is the recognition of our native country through love of one another. We glimpse his or her eternal identity, and so also our own, and we know in that moment that we have the freedom of that country forever. So it's like when you love someone so much, you look at them and you see home in their eyes. But we forget so quickly, seeking false phantoms, and sometimes absolutely, or else we do worse and decry the vision as a romantic nothing but. That is betrayal indeed. There is a beautiful passage in C.S. Lewis's Till We Have Faces, which exactly describes the Dantean experience of rencounter at the end of the long and purging return. For Orual in this story, her sister Psyche was the love of her life, through whom she had once glimpsed the reality of incarnation. That love had been tarnished firstly by the arguments of reason, then by possessiveness and jealousy, leading to bitterness against God and man. Since her loss of Psyche, she had rejected all joy and suffered horribly through the years of her long life. But she had taken up all her responsibilities without complaint and had endured her purgatory. Then at the end, she comes in a vision to her judgment, and, as Dante did,